Story 1. The Trail That Moved. Sarah Chen had been hiking the Appalachian Trail for 3 years, completing sections whenever her teaching schedule allowed. She knew the North Carolina portions like the back of her hand, particularly the stretch between Weah Bald and Wesser Bald. At 32, she'd logged over 800 miles across various sections, always solo, always prepared. She carried her GPS, paper maps, compass, and enough experience to trust her instincts. That October weekend was supposed to be routine, a simple 20-mile section she'd hiked twice before. She started at the Weah Bald parking area at dawn, the air crisp at 52 degrees, visibility perfect. The trail markers were exactly where she remembered them, the white blazes painted on trees at regular intervals. The first 5 miles passed without incident. She recognized landmarks, the fallen hemlock across the path at mile 2, the distinctive rock formation at mile 4 that looked like a seated bear. Everything matched her memory and her map. At mile 7, she stopped for water near what should have been a familiar stream crossing. She'd eaten lunch at this exact spot in June, but the stream wasn't there. The terrain looked right, the elevation matched her GPS, but the water was simply absent. She checked her position 3 times. According to every instrument she carried, she was in the correct location. She dismissed it as drought conditions and continued, though she couldn't recall any dry spell in the weather reports. The next white blaze should have been 30 yards ahead. She'd counted the blazes on her previous hikes, a habit born from caution. But when she reached the 30-yard point, there was nothing. No white rectangle on any tree. She walked another 30 yards, then another. The blazes had simply stopped. Sarah had been hiking long enough to know this was impossible. The Appalachian Trail Conference maintained these markers religiously. They didn't just disappear. She consulted her GPS, with overlaying the trail perfectly. But when she looked at the actual terrain, nothing matched anymore. The path beneath her feet continued, worn and clear, but it was leading in a direction that her compass said was southwest. The trail was supposed to go northwest. She stopped, forced herself to breathe slowly, and checked every instrument again. GPS said she was on trail. Compass said the trail was going the wrong direction. Both couldn't be right. Sarah decided to backtrack to the last white blaze. She turned around and walked back the way she'd come, counting her steps. After 500 steps, approximately a quarter mile, she should have seen the previous blaze. There was nothing. The trail behind her looked different too. The fallen hemlock she'd stepped over earlier should be visible from this elevation, but the landscape had changed. Where there should have been a gradual descent, there was now a steep rise she didn't remember climbing. She tried her cell phone, knowing it was futile. No signal as expected in this part of the mountains. Her satellite messenger device could send an SOS, but what would she tell them? That the trail had moved, that landmarks were disappearing. She wasn't injured, wasn't lost according to her GPS, had plenty of supplies. She'd sound insane. The sun's position told her it was nearly 2 in the afternoon. She'd been hiking for 7 hours, which matched her pace for the distance covered. But something about the light felt wrong. It had the quality of late evening, that golden cast that usually appeared around 6 or 7. She checked her watch. 2:15. The light didn't match the time. Sarah made a decision. She would follow the physical trail, regardless of what direction it led. Trails went somewhere. They connected points. Even if this wasn't the AT anymore, it would lead to a road or a town eventually. She started walking, marking trees with her knife as she went, cutting small notches at eye level. At least she'd know if she was walking in circles. The temperature dropped. Within 30 minutes, it went from comfortable to cold, her breath visible in the air. October in North Carolina shouldn't be this cold, not at this elevation. She pulled on her fleece jacket and kept moving. The trees around her seemed taller now, their trunks wider. She passed a massive oak that had to be 6 feet in diameter. She'd studied the forests of the southern Appalachians. Trees that size had been logged out over a century ago. After another mile, she heard water, a creek running strong. She pushed through the underbrush toward the sound and found a river. Not a creek, a river at least 40 feet wide flowing fast over rock. This was geographically impossible. There were no rivers of this size anywhere near her location. She was supposed to be on a ridgeline. Rivers didn't flow along the tops of ridges. She knelt at the water's edge, cupped her hands, and drank. It was shockingly cold, so cold it hurt her teeth. When she looked up, she saw something on the opposite bank, a structure. She squinted, trying to make sense of it. It looked like a cabin, but the architecture was wrong. The logs were massive, the style pre-colonial, the kind of building she'd only seen in historical reconstructions. Sarah called out. Her voice echoed strangely, as if the mountains were reshaping the sound. No one answered. She looked for a way to cross the river, but the current was too strong, the water too deep. She followed the bank downstream, hoping for a shallow crossing. The cabin disappeared from view as the terrain bent away. After 20 minutes of walking, she found herself back at the river's edge, looking at the same cabin. She'd made a complete circuit somehow, though she'd only turned in one direction. The impossible geography made her stomach clench with fear. This wasn't disorientation or map confusion. This was something fundamentally wrong with the space she occupied. The sun was setting now, truly setting, though her watch insisted it was only 3:30. She had maybe an hour of light left. Every instinct told her not to spend the night here, but she needed to make camp before dark. She moved away from the river, back toward what she hoped was the trail, and found a relatively flat spot between two large boulders. As she set up her tent, she noticed the trees had changed again. They were younger now, smaller, more like what she expected to see. The massive ancient oaks were gone. The temperature had risen back to comfortable. When she checked her GPS, it showed her location as 2 miles north of where she'd been when she'd found the river. But she hadn't hiked north. She'd been walking in circles. She didn't sleep. Sarah lay in her tent listening to sounds she couldn't identify. Footsteps that might have been deer or might have been something else. Voices carried on the wind, speaking words she almost understood but not quite. Once, she heard music, fiddle music, playing a tune that sounded both familiar and utterly alien. She gripped her knife and waited for dawn. When light finally came, she packed up in frantic silence and started walking in what her compass said was due east. East would eventually lead to roads, to towns, to civilization. She didn't care about the trail anymore. She just wanted out of these mountains. The terrain cooperated at first, sloping downward, opening up. She made good time, nearly jogging in her urgency. Then white blaze. It was painted on a tree directly in her path, exactly where it should be. Relief flooded through her. She'd found the trail again. She checked her GPS and it confirmed her position on the AT, exactly 13 miles from where she'd started yesterday morning. The math didn't work. She'd hiked at least 25 miles by her estimate, probably more. Sarah didn't care. She followed those white blazes like a lifeline, practically running. Other hikers appeared, coming toward her heading southbound. She wanted to stop them to ask if they'd experienced anything strange, but the words wouldn't come. They smiled and nodded, and she kept moving. 4 hours later, she reached the parking area at Wesser. Her car sat exactly where she'd left it, 24 hours earlier. She drove to the nearest ranger station and tried to report what had happened. The ranger listened politely, took notes about trail maintenance and missing blazes. When Sarah tried to explain about the moving landmarks and the impossible river, the ranger's expression changed from concern to wary. Sarah recognized that look. She was being categorized as dehydrated, confused, maybe suffering from exposure. She stopped trying to explain. She drove home, and the next day she uploaded her GPS track to her computer. The file was corrupted, showing her path as a tangled mess of loops and switchbacks that violated basic geography. Her photos from the hike were worse. Most showed nothing but white glare, as if the camera had malfunctioned. The few clear images displayed terrain she didn't remember seeing, including one crystal-clear shot of that ancient cabin across the river. She'd never taken that photo. She'd never crossed the river. Sarah still hikes, but never alone anymore, and never in that section of North Carolina. She kept the photo of the cabin, though. Sometimes she zooms in on it, studying the details. There's smoke coming from the chimney in the image, and if she looks very carefully at the darkened doorway, there's something standing there. Something tall and thin that might be a person, but probably isn't. She never zoomed in far enough to see its face. Some things are better left unknown. Story 2. The Voice in the Hollow. Marcus Webb had been a wildlands firefighter for 12 years before he retired to the quiet life of trail maintenance. At 48, his knees couldn't handle the fire line anymore, but he wasn't ready to stop working outdoors. The job with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy was perfect, solitary work maintaining remote sections of trail in eastern Tennessee. He worked alone most days, clearing blow, repainting blazes, and rebuilding water bars. The isolation suited him. His assigned section ran through an area locals called Fisher's Hollow, a deep valley between two ridges where the trail descended nearly 800 feet before climbing back up the other side. Marcus had worked this section a dozen times in the past year without incident. The hollow had a reputation, whispers about strange sounds and missing hikers from decades past, but every remote place in Appalachia had stories. Marcus didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He believed in hard work and proper maintenance. On a humid Tuesday in late August, Marcus parked his truck at the trailhead and loaded his pack with tools, his chainsaw, spare gas, and lunch. The forecast called for clear weather, temperature in the mid-80s, perfect conditions. He started down the trail at 7:30, planning to clear several fallen trees reported by hikers the previous week. The descent into the hollow took 45 minutes at his steady, measured pace. The first tree was right where the report indicated, a large poplar that had fallen during storms 2 weeks earlier, blocking the trail completely. Marcus assessed it, fired up his chainsaw, and got to work. The saw cut smoothly, and within 20 minutes he'd sectioned the tree and rolled the pieces off the trail. He was cleaning up the last debris when he heard it, a voice, clear as day, calling his name. Marcus. He straightened, killing the chainsaw's engine. The sudden silence was profound. He waited, listening. Nothing. The hollow was absolutely quiet, no bird calls, no insect sounds, no wind. That was odd. The forest was never truly silent. "Hello," he called out. His voice fell flat, refusing to echo. No response. Marcus shrugged it off. Sound did weird things in these hollows, carrying from miles away sometimes. Could have been another trail worker on the ridge above. He packed the chainsaw and moved on to the next reported blowdown, another half-mile deeper into the hollow. The second tree was a massive hemlock, recently dead from woolly adelgid infestation. It had fallen across a creek, creating a natural bridge. Marcus would have to be careful with this one. The wood would be brittle, the positioning unstable. He set down his pack and was reaching for the chainsaw when he heard it again. Marcus. Closer this time, much closer, right behind him. He spun around. The trail was empty. No other hikers, no wildlife, nothing. Just the dense green tunnel of the trail cutting through the rhododendron thickets. "Who's there?" His voice was sharper now, edged with annoyance rather than silence. Then after 10 seconds he heard it again. Marcus. This time from his left, from deep in the rhododendrons. The voice was strange. It sounded exactly like his own voice. Not similar, not close, identical, like listening to a recording of himself. A shiver ran down his back despite the heat. He'd heard about phenomena like this, acoustic tricks, echoes that somehow recorded and played back sounds. But he hadn't said his name. The voice was calling to him, not echoing him. "This isn't funny," he said to the empty forest. "If someone's messing around, you need to identify yourself." The response came from 3 directions at once, his own voice calling his name from the right, left, and behind him simultaneously. "Marcus, Marcus, Marcus." His hand found the canister of bear spray on his belt. Whatever this was, it wasn't natural. Marcus had worked in remote wilderness for over 2 decades. He knew the sounds of the forest, knew what was normal and what wasn't. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. He grabbed his pack and started back up the trail toward the truck. He could report this to the rangers, let them send a team to investigate. But after 30 yards, he stopped. The trail ahead looked different. The rhododendrons had closed in, the gap between them narrower than he remembered walking through. He turned back. The trail behind him was also narrowed, the vegetation encroaching. That was impossible. Plants didn't move in minutes. Marcus. The voice came from the trail ahead, from the direction of his truck. His own voice calling himself forward. Marcus. From behind, calling him back into the hollow. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. All around now, a dozen copies of his voice overlapping, creating a dissonant chorus. His heart hammered. Marcus forced himself to think logically. This had to be some kind of acoustic phenomenon, maybe combined with psychological stress. Heat exhaustion could cause auditory hallucinations. He drank deeply from his water bottle, poured some over his head. The cold water was real grounding. The voices stopped. He waited, counting slowly to 100. Silence. Normal forest sounds resumed. A crow called from somewhere above. Insects hummed. The hollow felt normal again. Marcus laughed, shaky with relief, heat exhaustion. He was getting too old for this work. He'd hike out, take the rest of the day off, come back tomorrow with a partner. No shame in that. He started toward his truck again. The trail was normal now, the vegetation back where it should be. He made it 50 yards before he saw himself. Standing on the trail ahead, facing away, was Marcus. Same clothes, same pack. His double stood motionless, as if waiting for something. Marcus stopped breathing. He couldn't process what he was seeing. His brain rejected it. "Hey," he managed to croak out. The figure ahead turned around. It was him. Exact in every detail, down to the scar on his left forearm and the faded logo on his shirt. But the eyes were wrong, empty, like looking at a mannequin wearing his face. The double smiled, and when it spoke, its mouth didn't quite sync with the words. "Marcus." He ran. Marcus dropped his pack and ran back into the hollow, away from that thing wearing his face. Branches whipped at him, roots grabbed at his boots. He heard his own voice behind him, calling his name over and over, each repetition closer than the last. The trail twisted in ways he didn't remember. Suddenly he was at the hemlock tree again, the one fallen across the creek. He splashed across the water, using the tree as a bridge, and kept running. His lungs burned. He wasn't in firefighting shape anymore, but fear drove him forward. The voices multiplied. A dozen of them, all his voice, calling from every direction. "Marcus, Marcus, Marcus." Some whispered, some shouted. Some spoke in tones he'd never used, angry or pleading or mockingly sweet. He broke through a wall of rhododendrons and stumbled into a clearing he'd never seen before. In the center stood an old well, the stone crumbling, covered in moss. He approached it cautiously. The voices had stopped again. He could hear his own ragged breathing, his heart pounding. Marcus looked into the well, darkness. Then far below, a glimmer of water. No, not water. Eyes, hundreds of eyes looking up at him. As he watched, faces resolved in the darkness. His face repeated endlessly, all staring up at him with those empty, wrong eyes. One of them spoke, the sound floating up from the depths. "Stay." The word reverberated, changing as it echoed. "Stay, stay with us, stay here, don't leave, you belong here." "You've always been here." Marcus staggered back from the well. He turned to run and collided with himself. The double from the trail stood inches away. Others emerged from the forest, a half-dozen copies of Marcus surrounding him. They moved in perfect unison, their heads tilting at the same angle, their arms rising together. They spoke as one. "You can't leave. You're already here. You've always been here." He broke through their circle, shoving past his own shoulder, and ran. The forest opened up, the rhododendrons parting like curtains. The trail appeared beneath his feet, clear and marked. He followed it blindly, not caring where it led as long as it was away from the well and those things wearing his face. Time became fluid. He ran hours he couldn't tell. The sun's position didn't change. The shadows stayed the same length. His exhaustion was real though, his legs cramping, his chest tight. Finally, he couldn't run anymore. He collapsed on the trail, gasping. When he looked up, his truck was right there, 20 feet away, parked at the trailhead. He'd made it out. Marcus crawled to the truck, got the door open, pulled himself inside. His hands shook so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine started. He reversed onto the road and drove. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He didn't want to see what might be standing at the trailhead, watching him leave. He drove straight to the conservancy office and submitted his resignation. The supervisor tried to convince him to stay, asked what happened, but Marcus just shook his head. He couldn't explain. They'd think he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. 3 days later, another maintenance worker went to Fisher's Hollow to finish the job Marcus had abandoned. The worker found Marcus's pack and tools exactly where he'd dropped them, but he also found something else. Fresh chainsaw cuts on the second hemlock tree, the one Marcus had never reached. And on a nearby tree, carved deeply into the bark, was a message in Marcus's handwriting. "I'm still here." Marcus saw the photos when the supervisor called him, worried. He stared at that carving. He hadn't done that. He'd never made it to that tree. But the handwriting was definitely his, the distinctive way he carved letters, the pressure patterns of his grip. That was 6 months ago. Marcus moved to Ohio, got a job doing landscaping work. He never hikes anymore, never even walks in the woods. Sometimes, on quiet nights, he hears his own voice calling his name from outside his apartment. He never looks. He's learned that some voices shouldn't be answered, and some places in the mountains don't let you leave, not really. Part of him is still in that hollow and always will be. Story 3. The Ascending Stairs. Jennifer Rodriguez was documenting her through hike of the Appalachian Trail for her YouTube channel, filming daily vlogs as she made her way from Georgia to Maine. At 26, she'd quit her marketing job in Denver to chase this dream, and her channel had grown to 60,000 subscribers watching her journey. She was in Virginia, day 83 of her hike, averaging 15 miles per day despite the challenging terrain. The section from Pearisburg to Catawba was reportedly beautiful but difficult, with several steep ascents. Jennifer started early, her camera already rolling as she narrated her plans for the day. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, but showed the storms holding off until evening. She had plenty of time. "Morning, trail family," she said to the camera, her usual greeting. "Day 83, and we're tackling some elevation today. The guidebook says there's a stone staircase on this section, built by trail crews in the 70s. Should be interesting." She hiked for 3 hours, making good time, her camera mounted on her chest strap for hands-free filming. She'd gotten used to the weight, the constant recording. Her subscribers loved the real-time experience, feeling like they were hiking with her. She passed several other northbound hikers, exchanging the usual trail pleasantries. At noon, she found the stairs. They were built into the mountainside, wide stone steps climbing steeply up the ridge. Each step was about 8 inches high, carved from local granite, weathered but solid. Jennifer counted them as she climbed, a habit she developed to measure her progress. At 50 steps, she paused to catch her breath and take a water break. "These stairs are no joke," she told the camera, slightly winded. "Definitely getting a workout today." She continued climbing. At 100 steps, she paused again. The stairs showed no sign of ending, disappearing into the mist that clung to the mountain above. That seemed odd. The guidebook had mentioned the stairs, but not their length. Usually, trail features were documented precisely. At 150 steps, Jennifer started to feel uneasy. Her calves burned, her breathing was labored, but that wasn't what bothered her. The stairs looked exactly the same at every level. Same weathering pattern, same lichen growth, same small crack on every 5th step. It was like climbing the same section over and over. She stopped and turned around, looking back down. The stairs descended into mist below. She couldn't see where she'd started. That wasn't right. She hadn't climbed into clouds. The mist had appeared around her. Jennifer checked her altimeter watch. According to the device, she was at 3,200 feet elevation. She'd started the stairs at 2,800 feet. 400 feet of climb, which matched her count of roughly 150 steps. The numbers made sense, but her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. She looked at her camera, considering whether to voice her concerns to her subscribers. She decided against it. No point worrying them over a strange feeling. She continued climbing. At 200 steps, she passed a hiker descending. A man in his 50s, gray beard, wearing gear from the 90s by the look of it. "How much further to the top?" Jennifer asked. The man looked at her with an odd expression. "Top of what?" "How many more steps?" He shook his head slowly. "I've been descending for 2 hours, haven't found the bottom yet." Then he continued down, moving past her before she could respond. Jennifer stood frozen. 2 hours descending, that was impossible. These stairs couldn't be that long. She pulled out her phone to check her mapping app. No signal as expected in the mountains, but the GPS still worked. The map showed her position as incorrect. According to the GPS, she was in the same spot she'd been when she started the stairs. The blue dot marking her location hadn't moved. She forced herself to stay calm. GPS glitches happened in mountain terrain. The tall ridges could block signals. This was just technology failing, nothing more. She'd keep climbing. Stairs had to end eventually. At 300 steps, the mist thickened. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. The stairs above and below faded into gray nothing. Jennifer's heart rate increased. She stopped and deliberately looked at her surroundings, trying to find something distinctive, any landmark. There. A particular stone in the wall beside the stairs had a vein of quartz running through it, making a pattern like a lightning bolt. She took a photo with her phone, making note of the step number. She climbed another 50 steps and saw the stone again. Same lightning bolt pattern, same position relative to the stairs. She checked her phone. The step counter app she'd been running showed 350 steps, but she was looking at the exact same stone she'd photographed 50 steps earlier. "Okay, this is officially weird," she said to her camera. Her voice sounded muffled in the mist, like the air was absorbing the sound. "I think I'm stuck in some kind of loop." She tried descending. After 50 steps down, she found herself at the lightning bolt stone again. She'd gone down but ended up at the same place. The stairs were defying basic geometry. Jennifer sat down on the steps and forced herself to think. This had to be explainable. Maybe she was disoriented, doubled back on herself without realizing, except the stairs were a straight shot up the mountain. There was nowhere to turn around. You went up or down, that was it. She heard footsteps above her in the mist. Someone else was on the stairs. "Hello," she called up. "Hello," came the response. Woman's voice, familiar. It was her own voice. The footsteps grew closer. A figure emerged from the mist, descending toward her. Jennifer felt her breath catch. The figure was her, exact in every detail, wearing the same clothes, same pack, same camera on the chest strap. The double stopped 5 steps above her. They stared at each other. Jennifer noticed the other version of herself looked exhausted, her face drawn, eyes hollow with fatigue. "You just started," the double said. "I've been climbing for days." "That's impossible," Jennifer whispered. "I thought so too. Keep going up, you'll see. The stairs never end. I tried going down instead. Same problem. I've passed myself 17 times now. Different versions all stuck on these stairs." The double stepped past her, continuing down into the mist. Jennifer watched until the figure disappeared, then looked up at the endless steps ascending into gray nothing. Her mind raced. This couldn't be real. This was altitude sickness, or dehydration, or some kind of mental break. Through hiking stressed the body and mind. Hallucinations weren't unheard of. She pulled out her water filter and drank deeply, forcing herself to rehydrate. She ate an energy bar, getting calories and salt into her system. She did jumping jacks on the stairs, trying to reset her body, clear her head. Then she started climbing again, determined to find the top through sheer persistence. The mist played tricks. Sometimes it would thin, and she'd see what looked like the ridgeline above, tantalizingly close. She'd climb toward it and the mist would close in again, revealing only more stairs. Other times she'd see hikers in the distance but could never reach them. They'd appear and disappear like ghosts. Her step counter app reached 1,000. She'd been climbing for hours. The sky was darkening, but she couldn't tell if it was evening or just the storm moving in. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. She needed to stop to rest, but the stairs offered nowhere comfortable to sleep. Each step was only about 3 feet deep before hitting the wall of the mountain. At step 1,200, she encountered herself again. This version was climbing up, looked fresher, and was carrying. Jennifer squinted. The other her was carrying a baby, an infant in a hiking carrier. "Wait," Jennifer called. "Stop." The other Jennifer paused, turned. "You'll understand eventually," she said. "Time is broken here. I've lived 20 years on these stairs, had a child here. Don't ask me how that's possible." She shifted the carrier. "We're trying to find the beginning. Maybe that's the way out." Jennifer watched her other self disappear into the mist below. A cold realization settled over her. She wasn't getting out. This was forever. These stairs existed outside normal space, normal time. She was trapped in an impossible loop, and already there were multiple versions of herself scattered across different points in the loop, each one having spent different amounts of time climbing or descending. She screamed. The sound fell flat, absorbed by the mist and stone. She ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time, going up because down clearly didn't work. Her legs cramped, but she pushed through the pain. She had to find the end. There had to be an end. The lightning bolt stone appeared again. She'd run past it dozens of times now, she realized. The loop was short, maybe 100 steps, but it repeated infinitely. She was trapped in a section of stairs that led nowhere, connected to nothing, just existing in its own isolated pocket of reality. Jennifer collapsed on the steps, sobbing. She pulled out her camera and turned it to face herself. "If anyone finds this footage," she said, tears streaming, "don't take the stone stairs in Virginia. They don't lead anywhere, they just exist forever." She stopped recording and sat in the darkness that had fallen. Real night or artificial, she couldn't tell. Other versions of herself walked past occasionally, ascending or descending, sometimes acknowledging her, sometimes ignoring her. She counted 7 different iterations. One looked elderly. One was a child. One was wearing winter gear and looked half frozen. All of her, all trapped. Hours or days later, Jennifer couldn't tell anymore. She started climbing again. What else could she do? Sitting still meant accepting defeat. Maybe there was a way out she hadn't found yet. Maybe she could glitch through the loop somehow. She climbed and climbed, her legs moving on autopilot, her mind detached from her body. And then, impossibly, the stairs ended. She took a step up and found herself on level ground. A trail, marked with white blazes, stretched away through normal forest under normal sky. The mist was gone. She could see clearly. Jennifer ran down the trail, not caring about direction, just desperate to be away from those stairs. After half a mile, she encountered a trail maintenance sign. She traveled 7 miles from where the stairs had started, according to the trail markers. 7 miles. She'd only climbed stairs. There was no way the stairs covered 7 miles. She kept hiking until she reached a road crossing. A car was parked there, the driver taking a break. Jennifer ran up to him, desperate for human contact that wasn't another version of herself. "What day is it?" she asked. The driver looked startled. "Wednesday, May 22nd. You okay?" May 22nd. She'd started the stairs on May 19th. She'd lost 3 days. Jennifer got a ride into town, bought a bus ticket, and went home to Denver. She never returned to the AT. Her camera's memory card was corrupted, the footage from those 3 days completely unrecoverable. No evidence of the stairs, the loop, or her other selves remained. But sometimes when she's climbing regular stairs in her apartment building or at work, she'll count the steps. And she swears she sees that lightning bolt pattern in the wall beside her. When that happens, she takes the elevator instead. She's learned her lesson. Some stairs don't lead anywhere you want to go, And in the Appalachian Mountains, there are places where the normal rules don't apply. She was lucky to escape. Others might not be. Story 4. The campsite that wasn't empty. Thomas Brennan was celebrating his retirement with a 3-week hiking trip through the Great Smoky Mountains. At 62, recently retired from 35 years as an architect in Philadelphia, he'd spent his career designing buildings and dreaming of the outdoors. Now he finally had time to explore the places he'd only read about. He'd started at Newfound Gap and was making his way along various connecting trails, camping at designated sites, taking his time. His guidebook listed a shelter at Ice Water Springs, but Thomas preferred his tent. He'd always been that way, valuing privacy over the social atmosphere of the shelters. So when he reached the shelter around 4 in the afternoon and found it crowded with a dozen other hikers, he consulted his map for alternative camping options. There was an unofficial site marked about a mile off trail, accessible via an old fire road. Perfect. Thomas hiked the fire road as the afternoon light began to fade. The site, when he found it, was ideal. A level clearing beside a small creek with a fire ring made of stones and enough space for his tent with room to spare. Someone had even left a neat stack of firewood beside the ring. The location was beautiful, surrounded by old-growth forest, completely secluded. He set up his tent efficiently, the routine familiar after 2 weeks on trail. He filtered water from the creek, made dinner on his camp stove, and started a small fire as darkness fell. The evening was pleasant, temperature in the 60s, no bugs, clear sky full of stars. Thomas sat by the fire reading his Kindle, feeling content. This was exactly the retirement he'd imagined. Around 9, he heard footsteps approaching. That wasn't unusual. Other hikers sometimes sought out the unofficial sites for the same reasons he did. Thomas looked up as a figure emerged from the darkness at the edge of his firelight. A man, probably in his 40s, wearing hiking gear that looked old-fashioned. Heavy leather boots, canvas pack, wool clothes. "Evening," Thomas said. "There's plenty of room if you want to set up camp." The man didn't respond. He just stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at Thomas. Not at Thomas exactly, more like through him. The man's face was expressionless, his eyes reflecting the firelight strangely. "You okay?" Thomas asked, sitting up straighter. Something felt wrong. The man turned and walked back into the darkness. Thomas heard the footsteps receding. He shrugged it off. Maybe the guy had seen the site was taken and decided to find another spot. Still, the encounter left him uneasy. The man hadn't said a word, hadn't even acknowledged Thomas's greeting. Thomas fed the fire another log and tried to return to his book, but he couldn't concentrate. The forest around him seemed too quiet now. He realized he hadn't heard any night sound since the man appeared. No owls, no insects, nothing. Just the crackle of his fire and the burble of the creek. At 10, he saw another person. This time a woman, standing at the exact spot where the man had stood. She was wearing a dress which was odd. Not hiking clothes, an actual dress like something from the 50s. She stood motionless, watching his camp. "Hello," Thomas called. "Can I help you?" No response. The woman's face was pale in the firelight, her expression blank. After a minute, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Thomas heard no footsteps this time. His heart was beating faster now. This wasn't right. 2 people, both acting strangely, both appearing and leaving without a word. He considered packing up and hiking back to the shelter, but it was dark, and navigating by headlamp on an unfamiliar trail was risky. He'd be safer staying put, staying alert. He let the fire die down, not wanting to advertise his presence anymore. He sat in the darkness, his headlamp off, letting his eyes adjust. The stars provided enough light to see shapes and movement. He waited, watching the tree line. At 11, they started arriving in numbers. One by one, figures emerged from the forest and took positions around the clearing. Thomas counted them, his breath shallow. 7, then 10, then 15. Men, women, even children, all wearing clothes from different eras. all standing motionless facing his tent. None of them made a sound. They didn't talk to each other, didn't move except to arrive and take their positions. They just stood there, watching. Thomas could see their eyes now that his vision had adjusted, all those pairs of eyes fixed on his location. The expressions were uniform, blank, and empty. Thomas slowly reached for his bear spray, keeping his movements minimal. He didn't know what was happening, but every instinct screamed danger. These weren't hikers. These weren't anything normal. One of the figures, a man in what looked like Civil War-era clothing, took a step forward. He was walking directly toward Thomas's tent, his gait stiff and mechanical. Others began to move as well, all converging on the tent from different angles. Thomas burst out of his tent, not caring about gear or supplies, just needing to move. He grabbed his headlamp and ran toward the fire road the way he'd come in. Behind him, he heard nothing. No footsteps, no voices. But when he glanced back, all the figures were following. They moved in perfect silence, a crowd of 30 or 40 people now, all walking toward him. He ran faster, his headlamp beam bouncing wildly. The fire road should be just ahead. He'd follow it back to the main trail, then get to the shelter where there were other people, witnesses, safety. His 62-year-old body protested the pace, his knees aching, but adrenaline drove him forward. The fire road appeared. Thomas turned onto it and immediately realized something was wrong. The road was going uphill. It should be going downhill back to the main trail. He'd climbed slightly to reach the camping site, so the return should be a descent. But the road was definitely climbing. He stopped, gasping for air, and looked back. The crowd of silent figures stood at the edge of the fire road, not following him onto it. They just watched as he stood there, bent over, trying to catch his breath and figure out what to do. The road had to lead somewhere. Fire roads connected to main roads eventually. Thomas started jogging uphill, conserving energy, trying to maintain a steady pace. His headlamp illuminated about 30 feet ahead. The road was overgrown, hadn't been maintained in years probably, but it was still passable. After 20 minutes of climbing, Thomas reached a structure. A cabin, small and decrepit, made of hand-hewn logs. This definitely wasn't on his map. No buildings were marked in this area. He approached cautiously. The door hung open on leather hinges, the interior dark. "Hello?" His voice was hoarse from exertion. "Anyone here?" Movement inside. Thomas's headlamp caught a glimpse of faces in the darkness. The same blank faces from the campsite. They were inside the cabin, dozens of them packed into the small space. As his light swept across them, they began to move, emerging from the cabin like water flowing out. Thomas ran. He left the fire road, crashing through the underbrush, no longer caring about trails or directions. Branches whipped at his face, roots tried to trip him. Behind him came the rustling of many bodies moving through the forest, still silent, relentlessly following. His headlamp died. The battery had been full that morning, should have lasted hours more. Thomas was plunged into darkness, broken starlight filtering through the canopy. He stopped running, knowing he'd injure himself blind. He pulled out his phone for its light. Dead. Also should have had plenty of battery. Standing in the darkness, Thomas heard them surrounding him. The rustling grew closer from all sides. He could hear breathing now, dozens of people breathing in unison, a horrible synchronized sound. Hands touched him, cold hands grabbing at his arms, his jacket, his pack. He tried to pull away, but there were too many. They gripped him firmly, not violently, just holding him in place. He felt himself being moved, guided through the forest. The hands never loosened their grip. He couldn't see where they were taking him, could only feel the ground beneath his feet changing, uphill then downhill across rocks and roots. They walked for what felt like hours. Eventually, they stopped. The hands released him. Thomas stood still, afraid to move. Slowly, light began to grow around him. Dawn was breaking. As the gray light increased, he saw where he was. The camping site. His tent stood exactly where he'd left it, his fire ring with cold ashes, his pack leaning against a tree. He was back at the beginning, but the forest around the clearing was different now. The trees were filled with people, hundreds of them standing on branches, clinging to trunks packed in the underbrush, all of them watching him with those empty eyes. Thomas looked down. His arms were covered in muddy handprints, dozens of them overlapping. His clothes were torn from the forest. This was real. This had happened. An old woman stepped forward from the crowd. Unlike the others, her face showed expression, a deep sadness. When she spoke, her voice was raspy, unused. "You camped in our place," she said. "This is where we died. Train crash, 1952. 73 of us buried in the clearing. You slept on our grave." Thomas's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the ground. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't know." The woman nodded. "We know, but you disturbed us. We don't sleep well as it is. Now you've woken us fully and we're angry. We need you to understand what it's like to be trapped, to be unable to rest." "What do you want?" Thomas could barely speak. "Stay with us. 1 day for each of us. 73 days, live among the dead, learn what we learned, then you can go." The crowd moved closer, tightening around him. Thomas felt their cold presence, their desperation. 73 days living among ghosts in the forest. He'd go insane. "Please," he begged. "I'll leave. I'll never come back. I'll tell people not to camp here." The old woman shook her head. "Too late. You stayed the night. You used our wood for your fire. You drank from our creek. You're bound now." On again, but his body wouldn't move. The cold had seeped into his bones, paralyzing him. The figures came closer, pressing in, and the world faded to gray. He woke up in a hospital in Gatlinburg. A ranger had found him unconscious on the trail near the shelter, suffering from severe hypothermia and dehydration. He'd been missing for 4 days. His gear was never found. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Thomas told them he got lost, took a fall, couldn't remember much. He didn't mention the campsite or the silent crowd. They'd think he was brain damaged from the exposure. Maybe he was. Maybe he'd hallucinated the whole thing. But when he looked at his arms, he could still see the faint marks of the handprints, visible in certain light. And when he counted them, he found exactly 73 distinct prints. He went home to Philadelphia and never hiked again. Sometimes, on quiet nights, he hears breathing outside his window. Synchronized breathing, many people in unison. He doesn't look. He's learned that some debts can never be fully paid, and some places in the mountains remember every person who disturbs their rest. He disturbed them, and they'll never let him completely forget. Part of him is still in that clearing, and will be until the day he dies. Maybe even after. Story 5. The Parallel Trail. David Park was documenting rare plant species in the Appalachians for his botany doctorate at Cornell. At 29, he'd spent 4 years studying the unique ecosystem of these ancient mountains, focusing on endemic species found nowhere else on Earth. This trip was targeting a particularly rare fern species that supposedly grew in a remote section of the Blue Ridge in North Carolina. He had permits, proper equipment, and extensive experience in backcountry research. The area he was searching wasn't on any official trail. David hiked in from the nearest trailhead, then bushwhacked following GPS coordinates from a previous researcher's report. The terrain was challenging, steep slopes covered in dense rhododendron, but he was used to difficult navigation. After 3 hours of hiking, he reached the coordinates. The site was perfect. A north-facing slope with the right exposure, moisture levels, and soil composition. David spent 2 hours photographing and documenting the fern colony, taking samples for genetic analysis and updating the species database. Good, productive work. He was pleased. At 4 in the afternoon, he packed up and started back. He followed his GPS track in reverse, retracing his route. After 30 minutes, he emerged onto a trail. That was odd. He hadn't crossed a trail on his way in. David checked his GPS. According to the device, he was exactly on his plotted course. But there shouldn't be a trail here. The trail looked official. Well-maintained, clearly marked with blazes, though the blazes were a color he didn't recognize. Instead of the standard white, blue, or yellow, these were a deep red, almost burgundy. The trail was about 3 feet wide, packed dirt, cleared of obstacles. Somebody maintained this regularly. David consulted his topographic map. No trails were marked in this location. The nearest official trail was 2 miles east, but trails did exist that weren't on maps, old unofficial paths used by locals or forgotten routes from decades past. He decided to follow it. A trail would lead somewhere, probably to a road or trailhead, easier than bushwhacking. He chose a direction that seemed generally correct and started walking. The trail was pleasant, easy terrain, a welcome change from the rhododendron thickets. After 15 minutes, he passed a trail sign. It was official looking, wooden with rooted letters indicating distances to various points, but the names made no sense. Whisper Gap 3.2 miles. Silent Creek Shelter 7.8 miles. Last Light Summit 12.4 miles. David had never heard of any of those places. He pulled out his guidebook, checked the index. None of them were listed. He checked his phone for signal. Nothing as expected. This was getting strange. He continued along the trail, growing increasingly uneasy. The forest on either side looked slightly different now. The trees were the same species, oak and hickory and poplar, but something about their arrangement felt wrong. They grew in patterns that seemed too regular, almost deliberately spaced. The light filtering through the canopy had an odd quality, too green, like everything was underwater. After another 20 minutes, David encountered another hiker. A woman, probably in her 30s, wearing modern gear but moving with a strange gait, her steps too synchronized, too rhythmic. She approached him on the trail. "Excuse me," David said. "Can you tell me where this trail leads?" The woman stopped, tilted her head as if listening to something. Then she smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Where you need to go. I need to get back to the parking area at Big Ridge. Is this trail connected to the main system?" "All trails are connected," she said. Her voice had an odd echo, as if she was speaking in a large, empty room rather than outdoors. "Just keep walking. You'll arrive." She continued past him, and she cast no shadow despite the bright sunlight. He turned to look after her, and she was gone. The trail behind him was empty. She disappeared. David's heart began to race. This was wrong. Everything about this situation was wrong. He needed to get off this trail, return to known territory. He stepped off the path into the forest, intending to bushwhack back to his GPS coordinates. The moment he left the trail, the forest changed. The regular spacing of the trees became a chaotic tangle. The underbrush thickened, became almost impenetrable. David pushed through for about 50 yards, fighting through vines and brambles, and emerged onto the trail again. The same trail with the same burgundy blazes. He tried the opposite direction, pushing into the forest on the other side of the trail. Same result. After fighting through dense vegetation, he ended up back on the trail. The trail wouldn't let him leave. David forced himself to breathe slowly, to think logically. This was impossible. Trails didn't trap people. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe he was disoriented, kept circling back. He checked his compass. It was spinning, the needle rotating continuously, unable to find north. That was impossible. Compasses didn't malfunction like that. He tried his GPS. The device showed his location, but the map overlay was wrong. Instead of showing the North Carolina mountains, it displayed a blank area with just the red trail marked, extending in both directions to the edge of the screen. His GPS track from earlier, the path he'd taken to reach the Fern site, was gone. The device had no record of it. David started walking again. What choice did he have? Maybe the trail would eventually connect to something real. He walked for an hour, maintaining a steady pace. According to his watch, he should have covered 3 miles. The trail showed no variation. Same width, same surface, same burgundy blazes every 30 yards. No intersections, no landmarks, nothing distinctive. He passed another hiker, a man this time older, carrying an ancient external frame pack. David didn't bother asking questions. He was beginning to understand this trail operated under different rules. The man nodded as they passed, and David noticed the hiker's eyes were completely white, no pupils, no iris. The sun wasn't moving. David had been walking for hours now, and the light remained constant. Always that strange green filtered afternoon light, the shadows at the same angles. Time had stopped or was moving differently here. He checked his watch obsessively. The seconds ticked away normally, but the environment contradicted those measures. At what his watch claimed was 8 in the evening, David decided to make camp. He couldn't walk forever. He needed rest, needed to think. He found a relatively flat spot beside the trail and set up his tent. He filtered water from a small stream that crossed the trail, though the water tasted strange, too pure, lacking the normal mineral content of mountain streams. He sat outside his tent eating a cold dinner, watching the unchanging light. No sunset came. The green afternoon simply persisted. Other hikers passed occasionally, all moving in the same direction, all with those slightly wrong features. No shadows or white eyes or that odd synchronized gait. David tried to engage them. Where does this trail go? How do I get off it? But they either ignored him or gave meaningless answers. To the end. Where it leads. Away from the beginning. He crawled into his tent and tried to sleep, knowing he needed rest even if his body didn't feel tired. Sleep came eventually, and with it, dreams. He dreamed of walking the trail forever, passing himself over and over, younger and older versions all trapped on the same endless path. When he woke, the light was unchanged. His watch said 6 in the morning. He'd slept 8 hours, supposedly. David packed up and started walking again. The trail had to end somewhere. He walked all day, or what his watch claimed was all day. The sun never moved. He passed dozens of other hikers, all strange, all wrong. Some were translucent, barely visible. Some flickered like bad video. Some walked backwards while facing forward. The trail was collecting anomalies, things that didn't fit in the normal world. On the second day, David realized he wasn't getting tired. His legs should be exhausted from constant walking, but they felt fine. He wasn't getting hungry either, though he ate from habit. His body was adapting to whatever physics governed this place. On the third day, he met a hiker who actually stopped and talked. An elderly man with kind eyes, the first person whose eyes looked normal. The man was sitting beside the trail, resting against his pack. "You're new," the man said. "I can tell you still look worried. How long have you been here?" David asked, desperate for answers. "Hard to say. Time doesn't work right. Years, maybe. I stopped counting." The man gestured at the endless trail. "This is a buffer zone, I think, between the real world and something else. The trail exists in the gap." "How do I get out?" the man shrugged. "Some people do. They just disappear at some point. No pattern I could ever figure out. Others, like me, were here for the duration." "I think it depends on how you got here. Supposed to be here or not. I'm a researcher. I was studying plants. I didn't do anything wrong." "Doesn't matter. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong alignment of whatever forces control these things. You walked into the buffer and now you're stuck until you're not." The man smiled sadly. "Try to enjoy it. The walking isn't so bad once you accept it. The trail provides what you need. Water, basic shelter, even food if you look for it. Just keep walking. Maybe you'll be one of the lucky ones who gets out." David left the old man there and walked. He walked for days or weeks. His watch claiming time was passing, but the world showing no change. He filled notebooks with observations, trying to make sense of the trail's properties. The blazes were spaced exactly 30 yards apart, never varying. The trail turned at precise intervals, following some mathematical pattern. Other hikers appeared and disappeared according to a rhythm he couldn't quite identify. On what his watch claimed was day 18, David saw something different. Ahead on the trail, the light was changing. The green tint was fading, being replaced by normal afternoon sunlight. The regular spacing of trees was breaking down into natural chaos. He ran toward the change, hope surging. The trail ended. It simply stopped, terminating at a parking area. A real parking area with real cars and real people. David stumbled into the lot, gasping. His truck was parked there. He checked the license plates of other cars. North Carolina, real, he was back. David checked his watch. According to it, he'd been gone 18 days. He checked his phone, which suddenly had signal. It said he'd been gone 6 hours. From morning to afternoon of the same day, he'd started his research. He got in his truck and drove straight back to Cornell. He never returned to the Appalachians for field research. He finished his doctorate using greenhouse studies instead. His committee was disappointed, called him the most promising field botanist in the program, but David didn't care. He kept the notes from the 18 days on the trail, though. He's analyzed them extensively. The trail followed a fractal pattern. He's determined. Each turn and variation followed mathematical rules related to the geometry of higher dimensions. The trail wasn't part of three-dimensional space. It existed in some folded region where extra dimensions intruded into normal reality. Sometimes David wonders about the old man still walking that endless trail. He wonders about all the other hikers trapped there, pacing through eternal green afternoon. He knows he was lucky to escape. He also knows the trail is still there, waiting for the next person known paths and into the buffer zone. The Appalachians are full of such places, gaps in reality where the normal rules break down. You just have to be unfortunate enough to find them. Story 6. The Breathing Cave. Rachel Murray was a cave surveying specialist, working with the National Speleological Society to map undocumented cave systems throughout Appalachia. At 35, she'd been exploring caves since college, had certifications in vertical rope work and cave rescue, and had mapped over 200 caves across 7 states. She was methodical, cautious, and experienced. She wasn't reckless. The cave she'd come to survey was newly discovered by local hikers in West Virginia, near the border with Virginia. It wasn't on any geological survey, wasn't mentioned in any records. The hikers had reported it to the NSS, and Rachel had volunteered to do the preliminary mapping. The entrance was a 3-hour hike from the nearest road, located on a remote mountainside. Rachel reached the entrance at noon. The opening was modest, about 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall, requiring crawling to enter. She'd been in thousands of caves that started this way. She set up her survey station at the entrance, taking reference measurements, then activated her helmet light and crawled inside. The entrance passage was tight but manageable, running horizontal for about 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Rachel stood up in the chamber, playing her light around. The space was roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across, with a ceiling about 15 feet high. Beautiful formations covered the walls, flowstone, and stalactites, indicating the cave had been developing for thousands of years. She heard it immediately, a sound like breathing, deep, slow inhalations and exhalations. Rachel stood still, listening. Caves made many sounds, water dripping, wind moving through passages, rocks settling. But this sounded exactly like breathing. Huge lungs drawing air in and pushing it out in a steady rhythm. She timed it. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, perfectly regular. The sound was coming from a passage on the far side of the chamber, a dark opening about 6 feet tall. Rachel approached it carefully, checking for air flow. Cave breathing was a real phenomenon, caused by pressure differentials between the cave system and the outside atmosphere, but it usually wasn't this pronounced or regular. The passage beyond was shaped like a throat. Rachel paused at that thought. It did look organic, the walls smooth and curved, widening like an airway. She'd seen similar formations before. Erosion patterns could create biological-looking shapes, but combined with the breathing sound, it was unsettling. She entered the passage, moving slowly, taking survey measurements every 10 feet. Her laser rangefinder provided exact dimensions, which she recorded in her notebook. The passage descended at a 15-degree angle, curving slightly. The breathing sound grew louder as she progressed. After 100 feet, the passage opened into another chamber. This one was larger, maybe 60 feet across. The walls were covered in a substance Rachel didn't immediately recognize. She approached the nearest wall, reaching out to touch the surface. It was warm and slightly damp. The texture was wrong for any cave formation she'd ever encountered. It felt like flesh, organic and alive. Rachel pulled her hand back, her mind rejecting what her senses reported. Caves were rock, mineral deposits, nothing living, except this felt alive. The breathing sound was louder here, resonating through the chamber. Rachel realized she could feel it, a slight pressure change in the air coinciding with each breath. The entire cave was breathing, the air moving in and out through some connected system of passages. She should leave. Every instinct said this wasn't a normal cave, but Rachel was a scientist. She needed to understand what she was seeing. There had to be a rational explanation. Unusual mineral deposits could appear organic. Pressure changes could create breathing sounds. This was just a particularly striking example of normal cave phenomena. She continued deeper, following the main passage. It descended steadily, twisting and turning like an intestine. Rachel mapped as she went, maintaining her professional discipline even as unease built in her chest. The temperature was rising, uncomfortable now, probably 85 degrees. Her breath came harder in the thick, humid air. The passage opened into a third chamber and Rachel stopped. The space was enormous, her light unable to reach the far walls or ceiling, and it was moving. The floor, the walls, everything pulsed in rhythm with the breathing, contracting and expanding like muscle tissue. Rachel stepped onto the floor carefully. It gave slightly under her weight, soft and yielding. This was impossible. She was standing inside something alive, a cave that was somehow also an organism. Her mind struggled to categorize what she was experiencing. She heard a sound behind her, a wet, sliding sound. Rachel turned, her light catching movement in the passage she just exited. The walls were closing. The passage was contracting, sealing itself. She ran back toward it, but the opening was shrinking rapidly. By the time she reached it, the passage had closed completely, the walls pressed together. Rachel put her hands against the warm, flesh-like surface and pushed. It gave slightly but didn't open. She was trapped inside this massive chamber, inside something that was very possibly a living creature. She forced herself to stay calm. Panic would be fatal. She needed to think to find another way out. Rachel walked the perimeter of the chamber, her light playing across the pulsing walls. There had to be other passages. Cave systems had multiple connections, alternate routes. She found an opening, smaller than the one she'd entered through, maybe 3 feet wide. It was dilated open like a sphincter. Rachel hesitated, then crawled through. What choice did she have? Behind her, the opening began to close. This passage was different. The walls were ribbed, creating a series of constrictions. Rachel squeezed through them, her pack catching on the ridges. The breathing sound was incredibly loud now, deafening. She realized she was moving down into the creature's body, if that's what this was. Deeper toward whatever served as its core. The passage opened into a small chamber filled with liquid. Not water, something thicker, viscous. The fluid reached Rachel's knees as she entered. The chamber was hot, at least 95 degrees. The fluid was digestive enzymes, she realized with horror. She was in something's stomach. Rachel retreated back into the passage, but it had closed behind her. She was trapped in the digestive chamber. The fluid was rising slowly, creeping up her legs. She could feel it beginning to burn, a chemical reaction against her skin. She screamed, the sound absorbed by the flesh walls. She climbed, finding handholds in the ribbed surface, pulling herself up above the fluid level. The ceiling was about 10 feet up. She wedged herself into a corner, bracing her back and feet against opposing walls, keeping herself above the rising liquid. The enzyme fluid rose steadily. Rachel watched it climb, knowing she had limited time. When it reached her level, she'd be dissolved. She'd die in here, digested by some impossible subterranean organism. She heard the breathing change. The rhythm was faster now, excited. The walls contracted more forcefully. Whatever this creature was, it knew it had prey. It was preparing to digest her. Rachel felt for her knife. She always carried one, a necessary tool for cutting rope in emergency situations. She pulled it out and stabbed it into the wall. The flesh-like surface resisted, then gave way. Fluid leaked out, not blood but some clear substance. The breathing sound changed, became ragged. She stabbed again, cutting a long gash. More fluid leaked out. The breathing turned into something like coughing, the rhythm disrupted. The enzyme fluid in the chamber began to drain, flowing away through some hidden channel. The walls shuddered. Rachel kept cutting, opening long wounds in the flesh. The creature was responding, the contractions becoming spasmodic. Suddenly, the passage behind her opened, the sphincter dilating. Air rushed through, a powerful wind. The creature was expelling her, trying to get rid of the threat. Rachel dropped into the fluid, which was now only shin deep, and ran for the opening. The wind pushed her, helping her move. She crawled through the passage, which was opening ahead of her, the constrictions relaxing. Behind her, she heard a sound like screaming, high-pitched and horrible. She emerged into the first large chamber, the one she'd initially entered. The entrance passage was open, visible across the space. Rachel ran, splashing through pools of liquid that were draining away. The entire cave system was convulsing, trying to purge her. The entrance passage was ahead. She threw herself into it, crawling frantically over the rough stone. Behind her, the cave let out one final scream, a sound that rattled her bones. Then silence, except for her own gasping breaths. Rachel emerged into daylight. She crawled away from the entrance, then collapsed on the mountainside, sobbing. Her legs were burned from the enzyme fluid, her clothes partially dissolved, but she was alive. She looked back at the cave entrance. As she watched, it closed. The rock face sealed itself, leaving no trace of an opening. Within minutes, the entrance had completely disappeared. If Rachel hadn't been staring at it, she wouldn't believe it had ever existed. She checked her surveying equipment. Her laser rangefinder was broken, the display showing gibberish. Her notebook was intact, but when she looked at the measurements she'd recorded, they made no sense. Dimensions that contradicted each other, passages that couldn't exist in normal three-dimensional space. Rachel hiked back to her truck, a 3-hour walk that felt like 3 days. She drove to the nearest hospital, told them she'd fallen into a chemical spill while hiking. The burns were treated and she was released. She never filed a report with the NSS. There was nothing to report. The cave didn't exist anymore, but Rachel quit cave surveying. She couldn't enter caves after that, couldn't crawl into dark spaces. She'd learned that not all caves are geological formations. Some are alive, organisms that exist in dimensions human senses barely perceive. The Appalachians are old mountains, among the oldest on Earth. They've had time to develop things that shouldn't exist, creatures that live in the spaces between rock and reality. She still has nightmares about the breathing sound, about being trapped in that digestive chamber. Sometimes she wakes up screaming, feeling the warm fluid rising around her. She knows she was lucky to escape, and she knows the creature is still there, somewhere beneath that West Virginia mountainside, breathing slowly in the dark, waiting for the next curious explorer to find its entrance. The mountains keep their secrets, and some secrets have teeth. Story 7. The Summit That Moved. Catherine Walsh was training for Denali, building her high-altitude stamina with increasingly difficult climbs in the Appalachians. At 41, she'd been mountaineering for 15 years, with successful summits on 4 of the 7 summits. She was methodical in her training, tracking every climb, every elevation gain, every heart rate variation. The Appalachians weren't technically challenging, but they provided excellent conditioning with their steep, sustained climbs. She'd chosen Mount Mitchell in North Carolina, the highest peak in the eastern United States at 6,684 feet. She'd climbed it twice before, using it as a benchmark for her fitness progression. The route she planned was 15 miles round trip, gaining over 3,000 feet of elevation. Perfect training. Catherine started at dawn, the air cold at the trailhead. She carried her altimeter watch, GPS unit, and heart rate monitor, tracking every metric. The ascent was steep but straightforward, following well-marked trails through beautiful forest. She passed several other hikers heading up, exchanging brief greetings. At 3 hours into her climb, Catherine checked her altimeter. 5,200 feet. She should be nearing the summit. According to her calculations, she had less than 1,500 feet of elevation gain remaining. But when she looked ahead, the trail continued climbing steeply with no sign of the summit. The trees should be transitioning to the stunted spruce fir forest that characterized the highest elevations, but she was still in mixed hardwood forest. She checked her GPS. The device showed her position on the trail, about a mile from the summit by its calculation. But the elevation reading on the GPS matched her altimeter, 5,200 feet. She should have gained more elevation by this point in the hike. Catherine continued climbing, slightly but not concerned. GPS and altimeters could have errors, especially in mountain terrain. She'd trust the trail. The white blazes led upward in a clear path. After another 30 minutes of steep climbing, she checked her altimeter again. 5,200 feet. She'd been climbing steeply for 30 minutes. She should have gained at least 300 feet of elevation, probably more given the trail's pitch. But the altimeter showed the same reading. That was impossible unless the device was broken. Catherine stopped and cycled through the altimeter's settings, recalibrated it. The device insisted she was at 5,200 feet. She felt fine physically. No shortness of breath, no dizziness, heart rate appropriate for the exertion level. If she'd somehow gained significant elevation without the altimeter registering it, she'd feel the effects. Air pressure decreased with altitude, oxygen became thinner. She'd notice. Catherine continued climbing, checking the altimeter every 10 minutes. Every reading showed 5,200 feet. After 2 hours of continuous steep climbing, she stopped. This made no sense. Even if the altimeter was broken, she should have reached the summit by now. She'd covered miles of trail, thousands of feet of elevation. Where was the peak? The forest around her looked wrong. She was still in hardwood trees, which shouldn't exist this high on Mitchell. The summit was supposed to be covered in Fraser fir with observation towers and buildings. She'd been there before. She knew what it looked like. Catherine pulled out her map and GPS, comparing them carefully. The GPS showed her track heading up the mountain, her position steadily approaching the summit. But visually, she saw only endless trail climbing through unchanging forest. The terrain contradicted the technology. She heard voices above her on the trail, other hikers. Maybe they could explain what was happening. Catherine climbed toward the voices, moving quickly. She rounded a bend and saw 3 people ahead also heading upward. She called out to them. "Excuse me, how much further to the summit?" The hikers stopped and turned. They looked normal, wearing typical hiking gear, carrying day packs. One of them, a woman about Catherine's age, smiled. "We've been climbing for 6 hours," the woman said. "Still haven't reached it." "That's impossible," Catherine replied. "Mitchell's summit is only a few miles from any trailhead." The woman shrugged. "We thought so too, but the trail keeps going. We're starting to think it doesn't end." One of the other hikers, a younger man, added, "Our GPS says we're at the summit, but obviously we're not." He gestured at the forest around them. "This isn't the top." The third hiker, an old worried. "We should turn back. Something's wrong here." But when they looked back down the trail, it was gone. Where there had been a clear path descending behind them, there was now only dense forest. The trail existed only in the upward direction. Catherine felt fear spike in her chest. The trail had been there seconds ago. She just climbed up it. Trails didn't disappear. She pushed past the other hikers and made her way to where the descending trail should be. Only impassable forest met her, rhododendron thickets so dense she couldn't see more than a few feet. "Okay," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "Let's all stay together and keep climbing. The trail goes somewhere. We'll find the summit or we'll find another way down." The 4 of them continued upward. Catherine led, setting a steady pace. They climbed for another hour. The forest remained exactly the same, hardwood trees with no change in species composition or density. The trail maintained the same steep angle, never leveling off, never varying. Catherine checked her altimeter obsessively. 5,200 feet, always the same reading. They'd been climbing for hours. By any reasonable calculation, they should be at 20,000 feet by now, higher than Denali, higher than any mountain in North America. But the altimeter insisted they were barely above 5,000 feet. The younger hiker stopped, breathing hard. "This is impossible. We've been climbing forever." "We should be exhausted." He was right. Catherine realized she didn't feel tired. Her legs should be burning, her lungs heaving, but she felt like she'd been hiking for an hour, not 6. Her body wasn't reacting to the exertion appropriately. "The mountain is doing something to us," the older man said. "We're trapped in some kind of loop." Catherine didn't believe in loops or supernatural phenomena, but she couldn't explain what was happening. She tried her cell phone. No signal, which was normal in mountains, but her phone also showed something strange. The time display was frozen. It showed 9:43 a.m., the time when she'd noticed the first altimeter anomaly. Hours had passed since then according to her watch, but her phone insisted time had stopped. The woman from the other hiking group sat down on the trail. "We need to rest. We need to think." They sat together, 4 strangers trapped on an impossible trail. Catherine studied their faces. They all looked scared but rational. These weren't people prone to hysteria. They were experiencing something real and inexplicable. "My name's Catherine," she said. "I've been mountaineering for 15 years. I've never encountered anything like this." The others introduced themselves. Lisa, the woman, the younger man. Paul, the older man. They'd been hiking together, training for a trip to Colorado. All experienced hikers, all baffled. "The trail only goes one direction now," Paul said. "We have to keep climbing. Maybe there's an end point." They climbed. Hours passed according to their watches. The sun didn't move in the sky, remaining at mid-morning angle despite the time supposedly being late afternoon. The forest never changed. They passed no landmarks, no distinctive features. The trail wound up and up, endless and unchanging. Catherine began to notice something disturbing. Occasionally, she'd see things at the edge of her vision. Movement in the forest, shapes that didn't quite resolve. When she turned to look directly, there was nothing there, but she felt watched. "Do you see them?" Lisa asked quietly. "The things in the tree," so Catherine wasn't imagining it. "Yes. They're getting closer," Connor said. He sounded frightened. "Every time I look, they're a little nearer to the trail." Paul stopped walking. "We need to talk about what's happening, rationally. This mountain is doing something to reality around us. We're in an anomaly, some kind of space where normal physics doesn't apply." "That's not possible," Catherine said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're experiencing it. It's happening whether it's possible or not." Paul ran his hand through his gray hair. "The question is, how do we escape?" They discussed options. Keep climbing, hoping the trail ended somewhere. Try to force their way off the trail into the forest. Wait and see if the anomaly resolved on its own. None of the options seemed promising. Catherine made a decision. "I'm going to try going off trail. If we can get away from the path, maybe we can break whatever's holding us." Before the others could respond, she pushed into the forest beside the trail. The vegetation resisted, branches seeming to actively block her way. She forced through, breaking branches, ignoring scratches. After 20 feet of fighting through the underbrush, she suddenly found herself back on the trail ahead of her position. She'd somehow circled around and emerged further up. "That's what happened to us when we tried," Lisa said. She'd moved up to where Catherine had emerged. "The forest loops you back to the trail." They were truly trapped. The trail was the only reality here. Everything else was just window dressing, fake forest surrounding an impossible path. The shapes in the trees were closer now, clearly visible. They looked like people or had once been people, thin and elongated with too many joints in their limbs. They moved through the trees with inhuman grace, pacing the hikers. "There are other people who got trapped," Paul said, his voice hollow. They've been here so long. Catherine refused to accept that. No, we're getting out. There has to be a way. She noticed something ahead, a break in the pattern. The trail forked, something it hadn't done before. Two paths, one continuing to climb, one heading level along the ridgeline. The level path, she said. Maybe that's the exit. They took the level path. It curved around the mountainside, maintaining elevation. For the first time in hours, they weren't climbing. Catherine checked her altimeter. The reading was changing. 5,300, 5,400. The numbers were increasing even though they weren't climbing. Altitude was being added, reality adjusting. The path opened onto a summit. Not Mitchell's summit with its towers and buildings, but a bare rocky peak. The four hikers emerged onto it, and suddenly Catherine could see everything. The whole world spread below, but it was wrong. The mountains went on forever, ridge after ridge after ridge, far more than should exist in the Appalachians. And all of them had trails carved into their slopes, endless trails climbing and descending, and tiny figures on those trails hiking forever. It's all connected, Lisa whispered. All the trails, all the mountains, they're all part of this. Catherine saw other summits in the distance, each one crowned with tiny figures standing where they stood now, looking out at the impossible geography. Other hikers who'd found this viewpoint, who'd seen the truth. We can't stay here, Connor said. We'll end up like those things in the trees. A path led down from the summit, descending the other side of the mountain. Catherine started down it without thinking. The others followed. They descended rapidly, almost running. The forest closed in again, but different now. The trees were normal, the vegetation natural. After 30 minutes of descent, they emerged at a parking area. Catherine's truck was parked there. Lisa's car was beside it. They'd somehow returned to the real world, though whether they'd descended Mitchell or some other mountain, Catherine couldn't tell. They exchanged phone numbers, promised to stay in touch, to talk about what happened. Then they drove away, desperate to be anywhere else. Catherine never went back to Mitchell. She gave up on Denali, on high-altitude mountaineering. She couldn't trust mountains anymore. Sometimes she dreams of that endless trail, of climbing forever through unchanging forest. In the dreams, she knows she never really left. Part of her is still there, climbing through the 5,200-foot elevation, watched by things in the trees. The Appalachians are old, older than her mind can grasp. They've had time to develop their own rules, their own spaces where reality bends. She found one of those spaces and barely escaped. So lucky. Story 8. The Fog People. Raymond Torres had been a wilderness first responder for 8 years, covering remote sections of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. At 33, he treated everything from blisters to broken bones, heat stroke to hypothermia. He was good at his job, calm in emergencies, knowledgeable about mountain medicine. He worked out of a small station near Hawk Mountain, coordinating with rangers and responding to calls from distressed hikers. The call came in on a gray October morning. 2 hikers, a couple in their 50s, had activated their emergency beacon in an area of trail known locally as the Fog Hollow. The region had a reputation. Thick fog accumulated there year-round, created by some meteorological quirk related to the valley's shape and prevailing winds. Visibility was often less than 50 feet. Hikers got disoriented, lost the trail, ended up bushwhacking in circles. Raymond loaded his medical pack and drove to the nearest trailhead. The beacon signal was coming from about 2 miles in, not far. He expected to find the hikers within an hour, treat them for whatever minor issue they'd encountered, and guide them back out. Routine call. The fog started half a mile into the hike. One moment Raymond was walking through normal October forest. The next he was enveloped in thick gray mist. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. The white blazes marking the trail became critical, the only reliable navigation markers. Raymond followed them carefully, counting his pace, monitoring his GPS. He reached the beacon's location in 45 minutes. The GPS showed he was right on top of the signal, but there were no hikers. Raymond called out, his voice muffled by the fog. Hello, wilderness first responder, if you can hear me, make some noise. Silence. Then faintly a voice calling back. Help, we're over here. Raymond oriented on the sound and pushed off trail toward it. The undergrowth was thick, visibility worse away from the trail. He moved carefully, calling out regularly, following the voices. They sounded close, maybe 50 feet away. After 10 minutes of bushwhacking, Raymond stopped. The voices were no closer. If anything, they sounded further away now. He'd been moving toward them steadily, should have found the hikers by now. He tried again. Stay where you are, keep talking, I'm coming to you. Help us, we can't find the trail. The voice was definitely moving, despite Raymond's instructions to stay put. The hikers were panicking, wandering. This was getting dangerous. Raymond made a decision. He'd go back to the trail to a better position, try again from there. He turned around and started backtracking, following his own disturbed path through the undergrowth. But after 5 minutes, he hadn't reached the trail. He should have been there by now. He'd only gone 10 minutes off trail, couldn't be more than a couple hundred yards from it. He checked his GPS. The device showed him off trail, but the map display was strange. His position seemed to be moving even though he was standing still. The blue dot wandered across the screen randomly, disconnected from his actual location. Raymond pulled out his compass. It would get him back to the trail if GPS failed. He'd been heading roughly northwest off trail, so southeast should lead him back. He followed the compass bearing, pushing through the fog and vegetation. After 20 minutes of hiking southeast, Raymond knew something was wrong. He should have crossed the trail by now, probably should have crossed the entire valley and hit the next ridgeline. But he was still in thick forest, still surrounded by fog. The terrain showed no variation. He stopped and forced himself to assess the situation rationally. He was lost. The first rule when lost was to stay put, let rescuers find you. But he was the rescuer. There were hikers out here who needed him. And his GPS beacon would bring other responders to his location eventually. Raymond activated his own emergency beacon and waited. Help would come. In the meantime, he'd conserve energy, stay warm, ration his supplies. He had enough food and water for a day, had shelter and warm clothes. He'd be fine until pickup. He heard movement in the fog, footsteps, multiple people walking nearby. Hello, Raymond called. First responder here. Do you need assistance? Figures emerged from the fog. Not 2 hikers, but dozens of them. They surrounded Raymond in a loose circle, standing just at the edge of visibility. He couldn't see their faces clearly, couldn't make out details. They were gray and indistinct, like the fog had taken human shape. Are you the ones who activated the beacon? Raymond asked, keeping his voice professional despite his unease. The figures didn't respond. They just stood there, swaying slightly, as if moved by a breeze Raymond couldn't feel. He walked toward the nearest one, intending to check if they needed medical attention. As he approached, the figure retreated, maintaining the distance. Raymond tried another direction, same result. They wouldn't let him get close. I'm here to help, he said. If you're injured or lost, I can assist you. One of the figures spoke. The voice came from all of them simultaneously, overlapping, creating an echo effect. You're one of us now. Raymond felt cold fear. What does that mean? Who are you? We got lost in the fog. Years ago, decades ago, centuries ago. We're still here, still walking, still searching for the trail. The unified voice was hollow, emotionless. You'll search too, forever. The figures began to move, circling around Raymond. He turned, trying to keep them all in view. They were closing in, the circle tightening. Raymond broke and ran, choosing a direction at random and sprinting through the fog. Behind him, he heard footsteps following, dozens of feet moving in perfect synchronization. He ran for 10 minutes, his lungs burning, branches whipping at his face. When he stopped to catch his breath, the figures were still there, surrounding him at the same distance as before. They'd moved with him effortlessly, maintaining their circle. Raymond tried his radio. Maybe the other responders were already in the area, maybe he could reach them. But the radio produced only static, no voices, no signal. His phone was the same, no service despite being close to civilization. He walked for hours, the fog people following. Sometimes they'd speak, always in that unified voice. They told him about their lives before the fog, about getting lost, about searching for decades. They explained how the fog was alive, how it collected people, how it made them part of itself. The fog needs people, they said. It feeds on our searching, on our desperation. The more we try to escape, the stronger it becomes. Raymond refused to accept that. He kept moving, kept trying to find a way out. His GPS stayed erratic, his compass spun uselessly. The forest around him remained unchanging, dense and foggy and impossible to navigate. Night fell, or what passed for night in the fog. The light dimmed but never fully disappeared, leaving a twilight gloom. Raymond made a cold camp, not daring to light a fire. The fog people stood around him in a circle while he tried to rest. Their gray forms were more visible in the darkness, shapes that suggested human anatomy but lacked detail. No faces, no distinguishing features, just humanoid fog. In the morning, Raymond started walking again. The fog people followed. Days passed, or maybe just hours. Time became meaningless. Raymond's watch continued ticking, claiming days were going by, but his body didn't feel the passage of time. He wasn't getting hungry or tired, just maintaining a state of constant, mild exhaustion. He encountered other people in the fog, real hikers newly lost calling for help. Raymond tried to reach them, to guide them, but the fog separated them. He'd get close, almost touch them, then they'd vanish. Later, they'd reappear as part of the fog people, their forms gray, their voices joining the collective. Raymond realized he was changing. His hands looked less solid, more like mist. When he tried to pick up a stick, his fingers passed through it. He was becoming like them, losing his physical form, becoming part of the fog. "No," he said aloud. "I won't accept this." He stopped walking. The fog people stopped too, their circle maintaining its distance. Raymond sat down on the ground and closed his eyes. If the fog fed on desperation, on searching, then he'd do the opposite. He'd stop trying to escape. He'd meditate, find calm, refuse to give the fog what it wanted. Hours passed. Raymond sat in meditation, breathing slowly, ignoring the fog people. His training included psychological techniques for remaining calm in emergencies. He used all of them now, finding a place of mental peace. The fog began to thin. Raymond felt it rather than saw it at first, a lessening of the oppressive presence. He opened his eyes. The fog people were fading, their forms becoming less distinct. The fog itself was dissipating, lifting from the forest. Within minutes, the fog was gone completely. Raymond sat in normal forest under normal gray October sky. His GPS worked, showing him only a quarter-mile from the trail. His compass pointed steadily north. Everything was normal again. He stood on shaky legs and walked to the trail. The white blazes were exactly where they should be. He followed them back to the trailhead, emerging 3 hours after he'd entered. His truck sat in the parking lot, covered in dust. The rangers asked where he'd been. According to them, Raymond had been missing for 6 days. Search teams had been looking for him. He told them he'd gotten lost in the fog, found his way out. He didn't mention the fog people or his transformation. They'd think he was suffering from exposure psychosis. The original hikers, the couple who'd activated the beacon, were never found. Their beacon was located, sitting on a rock just off the trail, but no sign of the hikers themselves. The search was called off after 2 weeks. Presumed dead, lost in the fog hollow. Raymond knows they're not dead. They're in the fog, walking forever, searching for a trail they'll never find. He quit his job as a wilderness first responder. He couldn't go back into those mountains, couldn't risk encountering the fog again. He knows he barely escaped, that his partial transformation was permanent. On very humid days, his hands still become translucent, mist-like. He avoids fog, stays away from low-lying areas where it accumulates. The Appalachians collect things. They collect lost hikers, forgotten trails, and impossible places. The fog hollow is one of those spaces, a place where fog is more than weather. It's a living thing, hungry and patient. Raymond tells people to avoid it, to never go into the fog, but people don't listen. They think it's just superstition. Until they get lost and the fog people find them, and they learn too late that some mist is made of the souls of those who searched forever and never found their way home. Story 9. The Mirror Forest. Alexis Kim was photographing the Appalachian wilderness for a coffee table book, Ancient Mountains, a visual journey. At 28, she was building a reputation as a landscape photographer, her work featured in several major outdoor magazines. This project was her most ambitious yet, requiring months of hiking and camping to capture the perfect images. She was in Tennessee, working on fall foliage shots in a particularly remote section of forest. The location was perfect. A small valley with a creek running through it, surrounded by hardwood trees displaying spectacular autumn colors. Red maples, golden hickories, orange oaks creating a painter's palette of color. Alexis spent 3 hours working the scene, using different lenses and filters, waiting for perfect light. As she worked, she noticed something odd. Her shots were coming out strangely. The colors were right, the composition was good, but there was something reversed about the images. Trees that should be on the left appeared on the right. The creek seemed to be flowing uphill. She checked her camera settings, made sure the image wasn't being flipped horizontally. Everything was configured correctly. Alexis looked at the actual scene versus her camera's LCD screen, comparing them directly. They didn't match. The camera was showing a mirror image of reality, everything reversed. That was impossible. Cameras didn't do that unless the photographer used a reversal filter, which she wasn't using. She tried her phone camera. Same result. Perfect mirror reversal. Left was right, right was left. She even noticed text on a trail marker in the background was backwards in her photos, letters flipped. Something was wrong with this valley. Alexis decided to leave, come back another day with different equipment. Maybe her cameras had suffered some strange malfunction. She packed her gear and started hiking back toward the trail she'd used to access the valley. After 10 minutes of walking, she reached the spot where she should intersect the main trail. But the trail wasn't there. The terrain was right, a saddle between 2 ridges exactly where the trail should cross. But no trail existed, just unbroken forest. Alexis checked her GPS. It showed her standing on the trail, her blue position dot right on top of the red trail line. But visually, there was nothing. She walked in both directions along where the trail should be, searching for blazes or any sign of the path. Nothing. She tried to retrace her steps to the valley, figure out what had happened. But after walking for 20 minutes in the direction she'd come from, she found herself at the edge of the valley again, approaching from the opposite side. She'd done a complete circle somehow. Alexis sat down, forcing herself to stay calm. Something was wrong with this location, some spatial distortion. Her cameras showed mirror images, the trail had disappeared, directions were unreliable. She needed to think carefully about her next move. She heard voices, people talking nearby. Relief flooded through her. Other hikers could help her navigate out of here. Alexis called out and moved toward the sounds. She found a couple having lunch beside the creek, sitting on a fallen log. "Excuse me," Alexis said. "I'm a bit turned around. Can you tell me which direction is back to the main trail?" The couple turned to look at her and Alexis froze. They were reversed. Their faces were mirror images, features on the wrong sides. The man's hair was parted on the right in real life but appeared to be parted on the left. The woman wore her watch on her right wrist, but the watch appeared to be on her left. "You're new," the man said. His voice sounded normal but slightly off, like hearing it through water. "We've been here for weeks. Can't find the way out." "What do you mean?" Alexis asked, though she was beginning to understand. The woman gestured at the valley around them. "This place is mirrored. Everything is backwards. When you try to go east, you actually go west. When you think you're walking away, you're walking toward the center. We can't escape." Alexis looked at her own hands. They appeared normal to her, but when she held them up and looked at them through her camera's view screen, they were reversed. Right hand appearing to be left, left appearing to be right. How did this happen? Alexis demanded, "What is this place?" "We don't know," the man said. "We were hiking, stopped to rest here, and when we tried to leave, we couldn't. The trails disappeared. Directions stopped making sense. We've been walking for weeks, can't find our way out." Alexis refused to accept this. There had to be a solution. Mirrors could be understood, reversed, compensated for. If everything was backwards, she just needed to adjust her navigation accordingly. She pulled out her compass. If directions were reversed, north would be south, east would be west. She tried walking in what her compass said was north, physically heading toward what appeared to be south. The forest opened up ahead of her. This was working. She was reversal. After 15 minutes of walking, the trees began to thin, promising an edge to the forest, an exit. Alexis emerged into the valley. The same valley, with the same creek and the same spectacular fall colors. She'd walked in a circle again, ending up at the starting point despite compensating for the mirror effect. She tried different strategies. Walking while only looking at her GPS. Walking backwards. Walking with her eyes closed, relying on compass bearing alone. Every method ended the same way, returning her to the valley. The mirrored couple was still there, watching her attempts with sad eyes. "We tried everything too," the woman said. "Nothing works. The mirror doesn't follow simple rules. It's not just reversing directions. It's reversing meaning, reversing intention." Alexis sat down beside them, exhausted and frightened. "There has to be a way out. We can't be trapped here forever." "Others come sometimes," the man said. "They always try to find the exit. They always fail. Eventually, they become part of the forest." "What does that mean?" Alexis looked around nervously. The woman pointed at the trees. Alexis looked closely and gasped. The bark patterns on some trees looked like faces, screaming faces, stretched and distorted. The shapes of twisted branches suggested reaching hands. The forest was full of people who'd been transformed, become part of the vegetation. "How long do we have?" Alexis whispered. "Weeks, maybe months. We can feel it starting. Sometimes we look at our hands and they're bark instead of skin. Then we blink and they're normal again. The forest is slowly changing us." Alexis stood up, determined not to accept this fate. She was a photographer. She understood images and mirrors and perspective. There had to be a visual solution, some way to see through the reversal. She set up her camera on a tripod, pointing it at the forest. She looked at the scene through the viewfinder, seeing the mirrored version. Then she slowly rotated, comparing the mirrored view to what her eyes showed her. She was looking for inconsistencies, for breaks in the mirror effect that might indicate an exit point. After an hour of careful observation, she found it. One section of the forest didn't reverse properly. The trees there looked the same in the camera and in direct view. It was a small area, maybe 20 feet wide, but it was different from the rest. "I found something," Alexis called to the couple. "There's a spot where the mirror is broken." She approached the area carefully, camera held up, constantly comparing the mirrored view to reality. The zone of normalcy was like a bubble, a small pocket where the usual still applied. Alexis stepped into it and immediately felt different. The air pressure changed, a subtle shift. She looked back. The couple was watching her, but they appeared normal now, not reversed. The entire valley looked normal when viewed from this spot. She'd found a place outside the mirror effect. Alexis walked forward, staying within the bubble. It seemed to extend in a narrow corridor through the forest. She followed it, checking constantly with her camera to make sure she wasn't drifting back into the mirrored zone. The corridor twisted and turned, following some pattern she couldn't discern. After 30 minutes of careful navigation, Alexis emerged from the forest onto a familiar trail. The white blazes were there, clear and normal. Her GPS showed her position correctly. The mirror effect was gone. She ran down the trail, not looking back, desperate to be away from that cursed valley. After 2 miles, she reached a road crossing. Cars passed by, real and normal. Alexis collapsed on the shoulder, shaking with relief. She never went back for her camera gear, left it all in the valley. She filed a report with the rangers about the couple trapped there, gave them the exact location from her GPS, but the search teams found nothing. The valley was normal, they said. No spatial distortions, no missing hikers, just regular forest with spectacular fall colors. Alexis stopped doing wilderness photography. She couldn't trust landscapes anymore, couldn't be sure what she was seeing was real. She kept one photo from that day, taken in the Mirror Valley. When she looks at it, she can see the couple in the background, reversed and wrong. And if she looks very carefully at the trees behind them, she can see faces in the bark, dozens of them, all screaming silently. The Appalachians are ancient, folded and refolded by geological forces beyond human comprehension. Sometimes those folds create pockets, places where space is creased, where reflection and reality blur together. The Mirror Valley is one such place. The couple might still be there, slowly turning into trees, or they might have already completed their transformation. Alexis doesn't want to know. She's learned that some images should never be captured, and some reflections show truths too terrible to acknowledge. Story 10. The Endless Ridge. Michael O'Brien had been section hiking the Appalachian Trail for 5 years, completing it in pieces during vacation time. At 55, he was closing in on his goal of becoming a through hiker, just in a slower, more distributed timeline. He had 3 sections left, all in Maine, the most challenging part of the trail. He was tackling a particularly difficult ridge walk, 20 miles of constant elevation change over rocky terrain. The forecast was perfect, clear weather, mild temperatures. Michael started early, making good time. The trail in Maine was notoriously difficult, roots and rocks requiring constant attention, but Michael loved the challenge. The forests here felt primordial, ancient, wilder than the more southern sections. By noon, he'd covered 7 miles and was feeling strong. The ridge he was following offered spectacular views, the landscape rolling away in waves of forested mountains. He stopped for lunch at a viewpoint, studying his maps and plotting the remaining route. Another 13 miles with 2 major climbs remaining. He'd finish by early evening. After lunch, Michael continued along the ridge. The trail followed the spine of the mountain, occasionally dipping to cross saddles before climbing again. Standard ridge walking. But after an hour, Michael realized something was off. He'd climbed 3 distinct peaks, each one requiring significant elevation gain. But according to his GPS, he'd only gained 200 feet of total elevation. That was impossible. Each climb had been at least 300 feet. He'd climbed 900 feet total at minimum, but the GPS insisted on 200. Either his GPS was badly miscalibrated, or something was wrong with the terrain. Michael checked his topographic map. He should be approaching a distinctive double peak formation, 2 summits closed together with a sharp saddle between them. The feature was marked prominently on the map, but when he looked ahead, the ridge showed no such formation, just more continuous up and down, no distinctive double peak. He stopped and rechecked his position. The GPS showed him right on trail, exactly where he should be, but the terrain didn't match the map. The shapes were wrong, the landmarks missing. Michael decided to push forward. GPS could be unreliable in mountains, maps could be outdated. He'd trust the trail blazes, follow them to the next known landmark. There was a shelter 4 miles ahead, according to his guidebook. He'd stop there, reassess. He hiked for 2 hours, maintaining a steady pace. He should have covered the 4 miles easily, should have reached the shelter. But the ridge just continued, endless ups and downs, no sign of the shelter. The forest began to feel repetitive, each section looking identical to the last. Michael stopped and really looked at his surroundings. The trees were the same size, same spacing. The rocks were the same type, same distribution. Even the pattern, the spacing of roots and stone steps seemed to repeat. He was seeing the same section of trail over and over, but that was impossible. He was walking forward continuously. Even if the trail looped, he'd notice the loop, recognize where the trail turned back on itself. This trail went straight, following the ridgeline, no major turns. He tried marking the trail. He piled 3 rocks in a distinctive cairn beside the path, then continued walking. After 20 minutes, he saw the cairn again. The same 3 rocks in the same arrangement. He'd made a complete circuit somehow, returning to his starting point despite walking straight. Michael felt panic rising. He forced it down, made himself think. This was a navigational puzzle, nothing more. The ridge was creating an illusion, making him think he was walking straight when actually he was curving back on himself. He just needed to correct for it. He tried walking off ridge, descending toward the valley. After 30 yards downhill, the terrain changed. The trees became younger, smaller. The underbrush thickened. Then, abruptly, he was back on the ridge, emerging onto the trail in a different spot. The off-ridge direction had somehow looped him back to the trail. Michael tried the opposite direction, climbing above the trail toward the peak. Same result. After brief movement through changed terrain, he'd popped back onto the ridgeline trail. The trail was all that existed here. Everything else was just window-dressing, fake forest that redirected back to the ridge. He started walking faster, almost jogging. Maybe speed would break the loop, let him punch through to the next section. He ran for 30 minutes, his breathing ragged, legs burning. The trail scrolled past beneath him, unchanging. When he stopped, exhausted, he saw his rock cairn again. All that running had gained nothing. Michael shouted in frustration, his voice echoing across the mountains. The echo came back wrong, his words reversed, syllables in backward order. The ridge was breaking down not just space but sound, causality itself. He heard other footsteps on the trail. Another hiker appeared, coming from ahead. Michael called out to them, desperate for human contact. As the figure got closer, Michael's breath caught. The hiker was him. Same face, same clothes, same pack. His double walked past without acknowledging him, eyes focused ahead, continuing down the trail. Michael followed his double, running to keep up. If this other version knew something he didn't, knew the way out, he needed to stay close. But his double maintained the same pace, never slowing, never speeding up. After 10 minutes, Michael realized they were passing other versions of himself. Dozens of O'Briens, all walking the ridge, all trapped in the same loop. Some versions looked older, aged by years or decades of walking. Some looked younger, as if pulled from earlier points in time. All wore the same expression of grim determination, eyes fixed ahead, bodies moving mechanically. Michael stopped. If he kept walking, he'd become like them, a ghost on the ridge, pacing forever. He needed to break the cycle differently. He sat down in the middle of the trail and closed his eyes, shutting out the impossible ridge. He thought about the ridge's properties. It looped space, created copies of hikers, broke navigation. But why? What was the purpose? Natural phenomena didn't have purposes, but this felt deliberate design. The ridge was a trap, but traps caught things. What was it catching? He remembered folklore from Maine, stories about places where the boundary between worlds was thin. Thin places, they were called, where reality leaked through. Maybe the ridge was a thin place, and it was collecting people, pulling them out of normal reality into some parallel existence. If that was true, there had to be a boundary, an edge where the thin place started. Michael had entered the trap, which meant there was an entrance point. If he could find where he'd crossed the threshold, maybe he could reverse it, step back out. Michael opened his eyes and started walking backward on the trail. It felt wrong, moving in reverse, but maybe that was the solution. If the ridge had pulled him in going forward, going backward might push him out. He walked backward for 20 minutes, carefully watching over his shoulder to avoid tripping. The trail began to feel different. The repetitive quality lessened. The trees showed more variation. Michael kept moving backward, and suddenly he felt it, a tingling as he crossed some boundary. The ridge changed. The false quality disappeared. Everything snapped into normal focus. Michael turned around. The trail ahead led off the ridge, descending toward a valley. In the distance, he could see the shelter he'd been aiming for. Behind him, the ridge looked normal too, no sign of the trap. He'd escaped. He checked his GPS. Hours had passed, his watch showing 8 in the evening, but he felt like only minutes had gone by. Time had compressed or expanded, he couldn't tell which. Michael hiked to the shelter, arriving just before dark. Another hiker was there, a younger man who seemed surprised to see Michael. "Didn't expect anyone this late," the young man said. "You look rough, trail problems." Michael nodded. "You could say that. Where did you come from today?" "Started at the southern trailhead this morning, been hiking all day." "You?" "The northern trailhead." Michael pulled out his map. Trailhead was 30 miles away. He'd only hiked 7 miles before getting trapped on the ridge. But somehow, someway, he'd covered the remaining 23 miles while trapped. The ridge had moved him through space while keeping him in the loop. He didn't explain any of this to the younger hiker, just made dinner, climbed into his sleeping bag and tried to rest. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ridge, saw endless versions of himself walking forever. Michael never completed his Appalachian Trail through hike. 3 sections remained, all in Maine, but he couldn't face those mountains again. He tells himself it's age, that his body can't handle the difficult terrain anymore. But the truth is he's afraid of finding another thin place, another trap, afraid of meeting more versions of himself, stuck in eternal loops. The Appalachian Trail passes through some of the oldest mountains on Earth, hundreds of millions of years old, worn down from heights that once rivaled the Himalayas. In all that time, reality has worn thin in places. The boundaries between what is and what might be have eroded, creating zones where the possible becomes actual, where copies and originals blur together. The endless ridge is one such place. Michael escaped, but he knows others don't. He thinks about them sometimes, all those hikers walking forever on ridges that never end, trapped in loops of their own footsteps, eternal pilgrims on trails that lead nowhere. The mountains remember every step ever taken on them, and sometimes they decide those steps should be taken forever.